The Curly Howard mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good. For generations, Curly Howard has made audiences howl with laughter as the most beloved member of the Three Stooges. His childlike innocence, perfect physical comedy, and signature "Nyuk Nyuk Nyuk" became iconic parts of American entertainment. But behind that masterful comedic performance lurked a tragic reality that Columbia Pictures worked tirelessly to hide from the public. Today, we're revealing the heartbreaking truth about Curly Howard's life and career, facts that transform our understanding of those classic comedies we've enjoyed for decades. From hidden health crises to studio exploitation, from undiagnosed mental illness to the alcoholism that helped kill him, Curly's real story bears little resemblance to the carefree clown he portrayed on screen. Most disturbing is how thoroughly his suffering was concealed from fans who adored him, creating a false narrative that persists even today. What you're about to learn will forever change how you watch those classic Stooges shorts, revealing the painful reality behind some of comedy's most famous routines and the cruel exploitation of a man who gave everything to make America laugh. The gap between Curly Howard's public image and private reality represents one of Hollywood's most successful deceptions. While audiences saw a seemingly indestructible comedian performing astonishing physical feats with boundless energy, the man behind the character was deteriorating physically and mentally at a shocking pace. Columbia Pictures, recognizing Curly's immense popularity and profit potential, constructed an elaborate facade to hide his declining health, personal struggles, and the brutal working conditions that accelerated his collapse. By examining 5 crucial aspects of Curly's hidden story, we can finally understand the true tragedy of this comedy legend, a man who brought joy to millions while suffering in ways his fans never suspected. Let's uncover the carefully buried truth about Curly Howard's life and career, revelations that transform our understanding of one of comedy's most iconic figures. 1. His health collapsed far earlier than fans realize. When most people think of Curly Howard's health problems, they focus on the 1946 stroke that effectively ended his career with the Three Stooges. But the devastating reality is that Curly's physical decline began much earlier, a deterioration that Columbia Pictures deliberately concealed from the public while continuing to push him through an increasingly grueling production schedule. By the mid-1930s, when Curly was just in his early 30s, he was already experiencing serious health issues that would have sidelined most performers. He developed dangerously high blood pressure, struggled with obesity that fluctuated dramatically as he tried various crash diets, and suffered from chronic fatigue that made even basic movements difficult between takes. These weren't minor ailments, but serious medical conditions that required treatment and rest, neither of which Curly received in adequate measure. The physical decline became increasingly visible to those working with him, though careful camera work and editing kept it largely hidden from audiences. Crew members from this period recall Curly sweating profusely under the hot lights, sometimes nearly collapsing after particularly demanding physical routines. His signature rapid-fire delivery began to show occasional slurring, and the boundless energy that had characterized his early performances required more and more recovery time between shots. Most troubling was the studio's response to these obvious warning signs. Rather than adjusting production schedules or modifying routines to accommodate Curly's declining health, Columbia Pictures maintained its punishing pace of 8 Stooges shorts per year, a production schedule that required nearly continuous filming with minimal breaks. When Curly struggled to complete scenes, production would simply pause until he could continue, rather than addressing the underlying health issues that were causing these difficulties. The man who did backflips on screen could barely walk between takes, revealed one camera operator who worked on numerous Stooges shorts during this period. This stark assessment highlights the growing disconnect between Curly's on-screen persona and his deteriorating physical condition, a gap that widened as the years progressed. By the early 1940s, the decline had accelerated dramatically. Viewing Stooges shorts chronologically reveals subtle but unmistakable changes in Curly's performance, his movements becoming slightly less fluid, his reactions a beat slower, his voice occasionally thickening. To compensate, directors began cutting around his limitations, using more reaction shots from Moe and Larry, and structuring routines to require less sustained physical activity from Curly. What makes this extended decline particularly tragic is that it occurred during the period when the Three Stooges were at the height of their popularity, producing some of their most beloved shorts. Classics like A Plumbing We Will Go, 1940, and Microphonies, 1945, were created while Curly was already experiencing significant health problems, his brilliant performances delivered despite physical suffering that remained invisible to adoring audiences. The studio's willingness to extract performances from an obviously ailing performer represents a particularly disturbing form of exploitation. Columbia Pictures, under Harry Cohn's notorious leadership, treated the Stooges as profit-generating machines rather than artists requiring basic care and consideration. As long as Curly could still perform adequately on camera, even if he collapsed once the director called cut, the studio saw no reason to intervene or provide the medical attention he clearly needed. This pattern of neglect directly contributed to the stroke that eventually ended Curly's career, creating a situation where physical collapse wasn't just possible, but inevitable. Had the studio responded appropriately to his early health warnings, Curly might have enjoyed a much longer career and life, a reality that transforms our understanding of the Stooges' classic period from simple entertainment to a document of exploitation hiding in plain sight.
You go get a picture of those two while I peddle a lemonade. They're over there.
2. The stroke that ended his career happened in his 40s. The official narrative of Curly Howard's departure from the Three Stooges, to the extent that Columbia Pictures acknowledged it at all, suggested a performer who simply stepped away after a long career, to be replaced seamlessly by his brother, Shemp Howard. The truth was far more sudden and devastating. Curly's career ended abruptly when he suffered a massive stroke in May 1946, at just 42 years old. The circumstances of this career-ending event reveal much about how Columbia Pictures viewed the Stooges in general, and Curly in particular. The stroke occurred during the filming of Half-Wit's Holiday, though Curly had been showing increasingly alarming symptoms throughout the production. On the fatal day, he was resting on the set between scenes when cast members noticed his speech had become severely slurred and one side of his face appeared to droop. Despite these classic stroke symptoms, there was no immediate medical response. Instead, director Jules White simply worked around Curly for the remainder of the day, completing scenes that didn't require his presence. This incident marked the end of Curly's active career, though in keeping with studio practices, no public announcement was made about his condition or departure. Columbia simply brought in Shemp Howard as his replacement and continued production without missing a beat. For audiences in 1947, Curly simply disappeared without explanation, replaced by a different Stooge with no acknowledgement of the change or its cause. The most beloved Stooge vanished, and nobody told the audience why, observed one film historian who has studied the Stooges' career extensively. This silence reflected Columbia's approach to talent management, treating performers as interchangeable parts rather than individuals whose health might be of interest or concern to their fans. The studio's handling of Curly's stroke exemplifies the callousness of the system. While Curly lay in a hospital beginning what would be a difficult recovery, Columbia executives were already planning how to continue the profitable Stooges series without him, with minimal disruption to their production schedule. There was no retirement ceremony, no public thanks for his years of service, not even a press release acknowledging his departure or explaining Shemp's sudden appearance. For Curly himself, the stroke represented not just the end of his career, but the beginning of a devastating physical decline that would continue for the remaining 6 years of his life. The initial stroke left him partially paralyzed on his left side and affected his speech, devastating impairments for a physical comedian whose livelihood depended on precise movement and verbal timing. Despite some limited recovery in the months following the stroke, Curly would never return to the Stooges as a regular performer. He made just one brief cameo appearance in the 1947 short Hold That Lion, a bittersweet moment that showed how much his health had deteriorated. In this brief scene, a partially bald Curly, without his signature shaved head, appears as a sleeping train passenger. Though the moment delighted fans who recognized him, it's painful to watch with the knowledge of his condition. His face noticeably affected by the stroke, his trademark energy reduced to a shadow of his former performances. The timing of Curly's stroke at just 42 years old highlights the toll that his Stooges career had taken on his health. This wasn't an elderly performer reaching the natural end of his working life, but a middle-aged man whose body had been pushed beyond its limits by years of punishing physical comedy, performed under increasingly difficult conditions. The fact that he suffered this career-ending event while still in his early 40s transforms our understanding of the price Curly paid for his art and the responsibility that Columbia Pictures bore for pushing him to that breaking point. 3. He may have had undiagnosed mental illness. While Curly Howard's physical health problems have received at least some acknowledgement over the years, far less attention has been paid to his psychological struggles, issues that may have constituted undiagnosed mental illness that affected him throughout his adult life. According to family members, close friends, and biographers who have studied his personal papers and interviews with those who knew him, Curly displayed patterns of behavior consistent with conditions like bipolar disorder or severe depression. Those who worked closely with Curly described dramatic mood swings that seemed disconnected from external circumstances. He would sometimes arrive at the studio bubbling with manic energy, talking rapidly, initiating pranks, and displaying the childlike enthusiasm that translated so effectively to the screen. Other days, he would appear deeply depressed, withdrawn, uncommunicative, and displaying a profound sadness that confused colleagues accustomed to his more animated personality. The laugh was real. So was the pain behind it, noted one family member who witnessed these mood fluctuations firsthand. This observation captures the duality that characterized Curly's emotional life. The genuine joy he could experience and express existing alongside equally genuine periods of psychological suffering. What makes these struggles particularly significant is how they intersected with Curly's professional obligations. The demanding production schedule of the Three Stooges shorts required consistent performance regardless of his mental state on any given day. When experiencing what might have been depressive episodes, Curly was still expected to portray the manic, energetic character audiences loved, creating a psychological strain that likely exacerbated his underlying condition. Mo Howard, who as both Curly's brother and fellow Stooge was uniquely positioned to observe these patterns, later acknowledged in private conversations that maintaining Curly's on-screen persona often required considerable effort when his brother was experiencing dark periods. According to several accounts, Mo would sometimes need to actively coach Curly through scenes during these episodes, providing extra cues and encouragement to help him maintain the expected energy level. The studio's approach to these psychological challenges was, predictably, focused on productivity rather than well-being. Columbia Pictures had no infrastructure for addressing mental health issues among performers. No studio psychologists, no wellness programs, not even the basic acknowledgement that psychological struggles might require accommodation or treatment. As long as Curly could perform when the cameras rolled, his emotional state was considered irrelevant. This neglect was compounded by the general stigma surrounding mental health in the 1930s and 1940s. Even had Curly or his family sought professional help, the psychiatric treatments available at that time were often ineffective or even harmful by modern standards. The limited understanding of conditions like bipolar disorder meant that even a formal diagnosis might not have led to meaningful improvement in his condition. Instead, as we'll see in the next section, Curly increasingly turned to alcohol as self-medication, a common but destructive coping mechanism that temporarily alleviated his psychological pain while ultimately contributing to his physical decline. Without appropriate diagnosis or treatment, he was left to manage profound mood disturbances while maintaining the punishing work schedule that his contract demanded. The possibility that Curly suffered from undiagnosed mental illness adds another layer of tragedy to his story, suggesting that his suffering extended beyond the physical realm into psychological territory that neither he nor those around him had the tools to properly address. It also transforms our understanding of his comedic performance, revealing that the boundless joy he projected on screen often required overcoming significant internal barriers that remained invisible to his adoring audience. 4. His alcoholism was hidden from the public. Among the most carefully concealed aspects of Curly Howard's private struggles was his increasingly serious alcoholism, a condition that began as occasional social drinking, but eventually developed into a dependency that affected both his health and his performances. This addiction, which the studio worked diligently to hide from public view, played a significant role in his physical deterioration and likely contributed to the stroke that ended his career. Curly's relationship with alcohol appears to have worsened considerably during the late 1930s, coinciding with the increasing physical demands of his Stooges work and his possible undiagnosed mental health issues. What began as social drinking after shoots or on weekends gradually evolved into regular consumption, including drinking before and sometimes during filming days, a pattern that alarmed his brother Mo and other colleagues. "They let him drink himself to death as long as the reels kept turning," observed one crew member who worked regularly on Stooges productions during this period. This blunt assessment captures the studio's approach to Curly's growing addiction, a problem acknowledged privately but never addressed officially as long as he remained capable of performing when required. The most disturbing aspect of this situation was how Curly's alcoholism sometimes directly intersected with filming. According to multiple accounts from crew members and fellow performers, there were occasions when Curly would arrive on set visibly intoxicated, particularly in the years immediately preceding his stroke. Rather than postponing shooting or addressing the underlying issue, the production team would simply work around his condition, sometimes modifying scenes to require less dialogue or precision from Curly, other times using Moe and Larry to cover for his impaired performance. Moe Howard, in his role as both brother and de facto leader of the Stooges, found himself in the difficult position of both enabling and managing Curly's addiction. By some accounts, Moe would physically position Curly for certain shots, holding him briefly in place before stepping into his own position when Curly was too impaired to hit his marks consistently. This intervention allowed filming to continue, but did nothing to address the serious health issue that was unfolding before everyone's eyes. Columbia Pictures' approach to Curly's alcoholism epitomizes the exploitative studio system of that era. Rather than viewing his addiction as a health crisis requiring intervention, executives saw it primarily as a potential threat to production schedules and profitability. Their solution was not to provide support or treatment, but to implement workarounds that allowed filming to continue regardless of Curly's condition. This callous approach extended to public relations as well. The studio's publicity department carefully crafted Curly's public image as a happy-go-lucky comedian whose on-screen antics reflected his natural personality. Any hints of his struggles with alcohol were systematically excluded from press materials, interviews, and public appearances. When his drinking occasionally caused missed appearances or other public incidents, alternative explanations were quickly provided, usually involving minor illness or scheduling conflicts. The consequences of this untreated alcoholism were both predictable and tragic. Alcohol consumption exacerbated Curly's already concerning high blood pressure and contributed to his weight fluctuations, creating a feedback loop of worsening physical health. More significantly, alcohol's effects on the cardiovascular system likely increased his risk of stroke, potentially making his eventual cerebrovascular accident in 1946 partly attributable to this unaddressed addiction. The studio's willingness to extract performances from an increasingly alcohol-dependent performer without providing any meaningful intervention represents one of the most troubling aspects of Curly's story. It transforms our understanding of those classic Stooges shorts, revealing that some of comedy's most beloved routines were performed by a man struggling with addiction while surrounded by a system that valued his output over his welfare. 5. His final years were a tragedy nobody talks about. The story of Curly Howard, as generally understood by the public, effectively ends with his departure from the Three Stooges in 1946. The prevailing narrative suggests he simply stepped away from performing and lived quietly until his death in 1952. The reality of his final years, however, reveals a heartbreaking epilogue that Columbia Pictures and even many Stooges historians have largely glossed over. A period of profound suffering, institutional neglect, and gradual decline that stands in stark contrast to his vibrant screen persona. Following his initial stroke in 1946, Curly faced a difficult recovery process complicated by his existing health problems and limited medical options available at that time. While he regained some function, he never recovered completely, remaining partially paralyzed on his left side and experiencing ongoing speech difficulties. These impairments were devastating for a man whose identity and livelihood had been built around physical comedy and verbal timing. Rather than supporting their former star through this difficult period, Columbia Pictures effectively washed their hands of Curly once it became clear he could no longer perform in Stooges shorts. The studio that had profited enormously from his talent for over a decade provided minimal support for his ongoing medical expenses, forcing him to rely primarily on family assistance and rapidly dwindling savings. This financial strain was compounded by Curly's difficulty in accepting his new limitations. According to family accounts, he initially believed he would recover completely and return to performing, a hope that gradually faded as his condition failed to significantly improve. This realization contributed to periods of deep depression, further complicating his recovery and overall health. In 1947, About a year after his stroke, Curly married for the third time to Valerie Newman. This relationship provided some stability during his early recovery, but as his health continued to decline, the marriage came under increasing strain. Valerie eventually found herself in the role of full-time caregiver rather than wife, a responsibility she wasn't prepared for, and that created significant tension in their relationship. Curly's deterioration accelerated in July 1948, when he suffered a second major stroke that caused significantly more damage than the first. This event marked the beginning of his institutional care phase, as his condition now required more medical attention than could be provided at home. For the remaining 4 years of his life, Curly would cycle between hospitals and nursing facilities, settings that contrasted painfully with the fame and adulation he had experienced at the height of his career. "He gave them everything. They left him with nothing," observed one nursing home attendant who cared for Curly during his final years. This stark assessment captures the fundamental injustice of Curly's situation, a performer who had generated millions in profits for Columbia Pictures, now languishing in basic care facilities, largely forgotten by the industry that had exploited his talents. The physical decline during this period was matched by an equally distressing cognitive deterioration. The second stroke significantly affected Curly's speech and comprehension, leaving him increasingly unable to communicate clearly with family and caregivers. For a man whose razor-sharp comedic timing had once delighted millions, this loss of verbal facility represented a particularly cruel twist of fate. Mo Howard visited his brother regularly throughout this period, often bringing financial support from his own earnings. These visits revealed the depth of Curly's decline, with Mo later describing the emotional toll of watching his vibrant younger brother transform into a shadow of himself. According to family accounts, Curly sometimes failed to recognize Mo during later visits, a heartbreaking indication of his cognitive deterioration. The final blow came in December 1951, when Curly suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage that left him completely incapacitated. He was transferred to the North Hollywood Hospital and Sanitarium, where he remained bedridden and largely unresponsive until his death in January 1952 at just 48 years old. What makes this tragic end particularly disturbing is how thoroughly it has been sanitized in the official narrative of the Three Stooges. Columbia Pictures, which continued producing profitable Stooges shorts throughout Curly's decline and death, made little public acknowledgement of his condition or passing. When Curly died, the studio released only a brief statement noting the event without detailing the circumstances or acknowledging their role in his deterioration. This sanitized version of Curly's final years has largely persisted in public memory, allowing fans to enjoy Stooges shorts without confronting the disturbing reality of what happened to the man who brought Curly to life. By examining the truth of this period, we not only honor Curly's complete story, but also recognize the human cost of entertainment in an era when performers were treated as disposable commodities rather than artists deserving of dignity and care. The price of laughter. When we integrate all 5 aspects of Curly Howard's hidden story, a troubling picture emerges that forces us to reconsider not just his individual tragedy, but the entire entertainment system that enabled it. Curly wasn't simply a comedian who experienced health problems. He was a vulnerable individual exploited by a studio that prioritized profit over human welfare, pushed to physical and psychological breaking points, while his deterioration was systematically hidden from the public that adored him. The early onset of serious health issues, unaddressed mental health struggles, enabling of alcoholism, sudden career-ending stroke, and tragic final years together reveal a pattern of institutional neglect and exploitation that directly contributed to Curly's premature death at 48. Columbia Pictures extracted maximum value from his extraordinary talent while providing minimal support for his well-being, creating conditions where physical collapse wasn't just possible, but inevitable. Most disturbing is how this exploitation occurred in plain sight, captured on film for audiences who had no idea they were watching a man in physical and psychological distress. The laughter Curly generated came at an enormous personal cost, a price he paid with his health, his happiness, and ultimately, his life. The truth about Curly Howard transforms how we must view those classic Three Stooges comedies. Behind the brilliant physical comedy and perfect comic timing was a man suffering in ways his audience never suspected, pushed beyond human limits by a studio system that valued profit over people. While nothing can diminish Curly's extraordinary talent or the joy he brought to millions, Acknowledging the reality of his exploitation honors the complete truth of his life and legacy. The next time you hear that familiar nuke, 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 remember the real Curly Howard, not just the comic genius who made America laugh, but the vulnerable human being who deserved far better than the system gave him.